In Friedrich Nietzsche's acclaimed work titled Beyond Good and Evil, a prelude to the philosophy of the future, he flips philosophy on its head, posing the question, why not a will to untruth or falsehood or deception than a will to truth that philosophers have so tirelessly sought after? He argues that the will to truth in many instances is just often another will to falsehood and deception. Every philosophy up until this point, hitherto, has been a confession of the philosopher. And whenever a philosophy begins to believe in itself, it always creates the world in its own image, for instance. He argues that many of these philosophers sought to discover new faculties, for instance. With Schopenhauer, it was the will, right? This sort of aimless drive that humans have amidst a chaotic world. For Immanuel Kant, it was the categorical imperative. We can all discover this inherent metaphysical sense of morality through our faculties of reason, arguing that morality is set in stone as an objective truth. When many of these philosophers attempted to discover a pure, unadulterated truth, it was still oftentimes filtered through their life experiences
and their inherited values,
their
insecurities,
their perspectives, be they nefarious or not. For Socrates, and many claim Plato was working vicariously through the character of Socrates, sought to devalue the material world,
Plato,
and subordinate it to the abstract world of forms, where you find perfection in every sense of objects, of virtues like beauty, for instance.
Socrates, as a
dialectician, propped up reason or rationality as the supreme governing force over the human soul. This was concretized in a metaphysical sense over the spirited elements of the soul, like emotions and instincts,
in the belief that the knowledge of the good necessarily leads to virtue.
Oh, humans are emotional, they're driven by their desires and their passions, and this causes destruction, so we need to be more reasonable. But then there's an aspect that, okay, if you subordinate instincts and emotions to reason, well, you're flattening the human experience at that point. Is reason entirely unfiltered by emotions and instincts? Can you love someone purely through reason or rationality alone? The contemplation of the idea of pure beauty
as an eternal truth?
When you look at the etymological origin of the word truth, it derives from words associated with faith and constancy. A faith that something, some truth may correspond to reality, or is, maybe independent of our tangible, empirical human experience. Nietzsche famously exclaimed that truth is a mobile army of metaphors, metonyms, and anthropomorphisms. When you say I'm eating, that's a statement of truth. It's simplifying a very complex process of digestion, various sensory experiences, right, into that phrase, I'm eating. Or when you say this is a tree, yeah, we've conceived this idea of a tree as an object, for instance, but not every tree looks the same. Trees have various details. They have various parts to themselves, like trunks, like roots, colors, leaves. They change throughout the seasons. When you chop it up into firewood, it's no longer a tree, it's firewood. We're still deceiving ourselves in some sense by simplifying reality to such a degree to make it easily digestible and communicable between individuals. If you were to go around and describe every single minute, minuscule detail of everything, people would see you as absolutely insane, even though you might be slowly approaching this vague notion of truth more than just saying, that's a tree, right? Or that's a person. Or when we place a value judgment on a person like they're evil, for instance, well, that's often very interpretive as well, because what does it mean for someone to be evil? Somebody can be evil for various different reasons according to the person who labeled them as such. There might be disparate reasons why that person's evil. Someone might be evil because they just personally don't like that person, or they perceive them in some negative light, whereas to others, they might not agree with their views wholeheartedly, whereas to another person, maybe they were hurt by that person at a certain point. If that person changes down the line, are they still evil? But we give so much credence to certain value judgments that they kind of become branded on. They can sometimes become branded on somebody's identity, where we might ignore other aspects of themselves that transcend this notion of being evil, whether they are actually disreputable in some sense or not. A lot of people suffer from various afflictions, whether that's illness, loss, and countless tragedy. Maybe they aren't endowed with certain physical characteristics. They're not perceived as beautiful. So reality can grow very harsh, especially when it comes to social dynamics. And people are often disillusioned, upon the discoverance that others can be cruel, right? That's not the entire story to humanity, but other people can be cruel, extremely cruel. They might become disillusioned when they recognize certain aspects of themselves that they thought maybe they were impervious to. Do we really want to grasp the most darkest aspects of existence, and much less of ourselves, that we may or may not even be aware of? These sort of abstract religious ideas, for instance, like heaven and hell. There's that abstract notion that all of your suffering won't be in vain because you'll be able to experience an afterlife. Some people can sort of tantalize this notion of heaven and hell in an attempt to control others, and that can include like a genuine fear, maybe that, this person would otherwise be destructive if they didn't have some internalized notion of judgment, but it could also be used to exploit somebody's fears. Just because a lot of these are human frameworks and our human ways of making sense of the world doesn't negate reality. Animals don't need a conception of truth to know not to do something to protect itself from danger. Some animals, display affection towards one another independent of any reasoning behind it. His most famous exclamation concerning the death of God highlighted existential implications when this deeply inculcated sense of identity that a culture may have had vanishes, right? Where will people derive their sense of meaning, their sense of... Would future generations be well equipped for the ensuing nihilism that may have occurred? Nietzsche admires life-affirming cultures because they at least sought to embrace suffering and uncertainty to a greater degree. You acknowledge that maybe the masses,
in quotations,
require certain illusions more than those who can handle a life without certain illusions. A life that approaches more authenticity, if anything. But Nietzsche was also quoted as saying that even the wisest man is only occasionally wise. The deception he may interpret from others doesn't hold a candle compared to the self-deception that he inflicts on himself on a recurring basis. Some people say without a moral framework that they would never be a good person, that they would be barbaric and disreputable. So is that necessarily a reflection of humanity at large, or that individual particularly?